I think it's time for a book tag. Welcome to the depths. Hello, welcome back to Reading from the Depths. My name is Lecton. Thank you so much for spending some time with me today. Today, I thought I would do the Bookish Elements Tag. Now, I was tagged by two different people in this, so I thought maybe it's time to catch up and maybe do it. So this tag was created by Sarah at My Granny Era. She writes, I'm excited to share with you a new tag I created, the Bookish Elements Tag. This is all about the stuff we use to accessorize our reading. And I was tagged first by Robert at Robert G. Reader of Books, as well as by John at Must Read More. And so I will link to their videos down below in the description. And this is a quick little tag. It only has 8 questions or 8 prompts along with a prompt to tag others. So let's jump into it. The first one, how do you feel about foreshadowing or dropped hints? I think when done well, it's a kind of a critical and really exciting part of any book. It makes the book kind of more enticing and more involving. Not only when you're rereading a book and are able to see all these things you might have missed the first time that were pointing towards the ending. That's exciting. But aside from that, if an author does it well, then it creates an atmosphere, it creates a sense or a feeling that is pushing the book in a certain direction or pushing the narrative in a certain direction, and that kind of wraps you in the narrative flow, and I really enjoy that. There's different types, right? Stephen King is very famous for, in a lot of his books, he'll end a paragraph and then he'll just have one line that says, and that's the last time he saw him alive, or something like this. And so he has this really ominous foreshadowing that comes out of nowhere. And I actually really like that. I've seen other authors do it with too heavy of a hand. So that kind of thing, that explicit foreshadowing, doesn't always work if you're too heavy-handed with it. And in general, foreshadowing and hints, if you're too heavy-handed, it doesn't work. But when the author knows what they're doing, I think they add to the experience of the book. So I appreciate them. Next prompt, number 2. Bookmarks. What do you use and how do you feel about bending corners down? For bookmarks, I use whatever I can find. I have a few bookmarks that have just come from bookstores. I'll use anything at hand. Scrap paper, receipts, notes, anything that is flat and won't, tweak the spine of my book is fair game for a bookmark. Actually, I hopefully have some new bookmarks coming in the mail soon because for Christmas this year, I asked my nephew and niece to make me some bookmarks. I live in India and the rest of my family lives in America. And if you've never shipped anything from America to India, or from India to America for that matter, it is quite expensive. So they never send me gifts of any sort. But once in a while, just some letters and some art. So I have some art from my nibblings. My sister has 2 kids, a son and a daughter. My brother has an 18-month-old and a new baby on the way. So those ones are a little too young. But my sister's kids, I have their artwork on my wall in front of me behind my desk. And they agreed to kind of design some bookmarks for me, actually. So I'm looking forward to getting some bookmarks that are the art of my nephew and niece. But for right now, whatever's at hand, really. Number 3, forgotten bookmarks. Have you ever found anything strange in a book? In any of the used books I've bought, I'd say no. Unfortunately, I'd love to have a great story of having found something really fun or cool or exciting in a used book, but I haven't. I've definitely found things that I had forgotten I'd left in books, whether they were pictures or receipts or other random things that I had used as a bookmark at some point that I forgot about. So I found those, but nothing too exciting, unfortunately. I always hope to find that used book that has some really interesting thing in it, but it hasn't happened yet. So, we'll have to keep trying. Number 4, inscriptions and annotations. How do you feel about writing in a book, and how do you annotate if you do? I think writing in a book is great, no matter what kind of book it is. If it's a fiction book or a nonfiction book, a book that you're studying, I think if writing is helpful to you, then you should do it. So I write in my books. Usually in my fiction books, every once in a while I'll underline something, or in the margins, I will just kind of highlight the area that, that section that is exciting to me or that I want to remember. So when I flip back, I can see it. Once in a while, I'll highlight something, but that is more rare these days, at least in books that I'm reading for pleasure, whether they be fiction or nonfiction. If they're books that I'm using for study, if they're books that I'm using for spiritual development or for study, then that's a whole different ballgame. This is the textbook, the main textbook that I used last year. It's a commentary on Umachita, on Manamaka Avatara. Actually, it's a commentary on Tsongkhapa's commentary on that by our main textbook author, and Jetson Chitki. And so as you can see, this has all sorts of highlighting and underlining and notes in there. And the highlights are in different colors depending on what they're for, if it's a definition or if it's a section change or whatever it is. So there's a whole system, because this is a study text, so I refer to it over and over and over again, and having those things highlighted in that way is very helpful for me, and having notes written. And when I go to class and I bring this with me, the teacher one of my teachers might say something, so I write it down here, and then when I'm reviewing my notes, I have whatever my teacher has said. So in my study text or text that I'm using for spiritual development or for any sort of study, then those are filled with all sorts of notes. And there is a system, but it kind of changes by my whim. It's not entirely coherent, so it's evolving. Number 5, introductions and footnotes. Do you read them or avoid them, and what makes a good introduction? Generally, I read them. Well, not generally. I read them all. If it's a book I haven't read before and it is a new edition of that book, then I'll generally read the introduction. And I generally enjoy reading introductions by the authors. But if it's a reissue of a book or a later publication, then I have found that sometimes the introductions spoil books. So I've become nervous. So if it's a new edition of a book, then I will read the introduction. But if it's a reissue or a later publication of it, in that case, I will often leave the introduction until the end, just in case there are spoilers. And with nonfiction, I always read the introduction because there's really not a lot to spoil there. Footnotes, I read all of them. Endnotes, I try to read, but I usually get distracted because having to go back and forth. But for footnotes, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, I'll read all of them. And what makes a good introduction? I mean, I think it depends on who is writing it. If it's the author writing an introduction, I often like to know like what frame of mind they were in when they decided to write the text and why, like what was the genesis of the story. And if it is like a reissue of the text and it is someone else writing it, then in those cases, I generally want to see like what about the text speaks to them that they think this is a valued text or a reason that this text should be reissued or, read widely. And that's where you get into spoiler territory. So those are the ones I'm more cautious of. But otherwise, like, what is the point of having someone write an introduction? If they, like, I don't need a summary of the story. I need to know what impact this story had on you and why you think this story is valuable. So that is what I want from an introduction if it's not from the author. And if it's from the author, I want to know why did you write this story? What was the inspiration? So that's what I'm looking for. And then, of course, if it's nonfiction, maybe if there's any context that is needed or if there's any background information, then that is always helpful as well. Number 6, accessories. Do you use bookish accessories like a clip-on reading light, book sleeves, annotation materials, bookstand, etc.? I don't. I have a Kobo, like my digital reader, so I guess that's an accessory in and of itself. And other than that, I don't use anything. If it is nighttime and I don't have any lights available, then I'll read a digital book instead of a physical book. Otherwise, I don't really have any need for them. Every once in a while, especially with some hardbacks, it would be nice to have a bookstand. So I've thought about it, but the number of books I read where that would be beneficial is so slim that it's not something that, is worthwhile for me to invest in. Otherwise, no, I don't really use anything. Number 7, art and illustrations. How do cover art and illustrations affect your reading experience? I'll say not much. For cover art, I mean, I appreciate really good cover art. And if I have more than one option available and I'm purchasing a book, at least a physical copy of a book, then I'll try to purchase the one that is more appealing to me. But it doesn't really affect my experience of reading the book. And then in the book, if there are illustrations, I mean, I enjoy those. They add a little bit. I've heard some people say that if the illustrations don't match what they have in their mind, then that upsets their reading experience. I haven't had that, but they can add a little bit. Like, for instance, I just finished a collection of short stories by Laird Barron called Not a Speck of Light. And before every one of the stories, there's an illustration. So, for instance, this is the illustration for the story, Don't Make Me Assume My Ultimate Form. And I like it. And I like, in short story collections when they have things like this, because I look at this image and I try to figure out what the heck this has to do with the story I'm about to read. And so that's fun. It's also a little bit abstract, right? Like, it's not a very detailed illustration here. So it's not like I'm going to have anything spoiled by it or like it's going to upset my reading experience. So things like that are nice. I appreciate them, but they don't make or break a book for me. And then lastly, number 8, format. Which format of books do you prefer? Hardback, paperback, audio, or digital? Do you do different things for different situations? The majority of the books I read digital copies. I read them on my Kobo. I don't know if that's my preferred option. I like reading paperbacks. Hardbacks, I have some, especially I buy hardbacks either if they're used or if it's an author that I really want to support. So I want to buy the book right when it is released. Then I'll have hardbacks of those. But in general, I prefer reading paperbacks to hardbacks. And I prefer reading paperback to digital in most cases. I just have more digital books because it is more cost effective as well as more, space effective. And I do appreciate having digital books because I travel a lot. And, books, when they go in your luggage, are like rocks. So I prefer traveling with a digital book. And if you get a nice e-reader that is an e-ink screen Their batteries last quite a long time, so no matter how long my trip, I don't have to worry about recharging it. So in those cases, I prefer digital, only because of the ease of bringing books back and forth. But, in an ideal circumstance, then I prefer paperbacks. I will say I don't have much experience doing audiobooks. I've only read maybe a dozen audiobooks in my life, or I suppose to listen to them, depending on how pedantic you want to be. I think my problem with it is that my attention wavers, and I'm used to listening to podcasts. And when I listen to podcasts, I listen to them at a much faster speed. I think now I've gotten so used to it. Always listen to podcasts or audiobooks with headphones on. I find that when I listen to them with headphones, I can increase the speed more. And these days, I listen to podcasts, I think, at 3x speed, which is a little bit insane. But that's how I enjoy taking in whatever the podcasts are. But with narrative and with fiction, if I try to listen to them more than maybe 1.5 speed, then I don't get as much because I'm engaging in a story different than I am in podcasts. And as a result of that, I have to listen to them more slowly. And I feel like there are so many other things I should be doing. So I feel guilty listening to audiobooks because I feel like I am not making the most use of my time. But if I try to do anything else, like if I try to multitask while I'm listening to a book, then I lose my place in the book and I can't follow along. I get distracted. So because of that, I have steered clear of audiobooks. I haven't tried nonfiction in audio. I think that might be the way to go for me, but I only read maybe one nonfiction book a month, so there isn't a lot of opportunity for it. But in general, I appreciate audiobooks. And actually, I just saw a really good YouTube video from John Green, the author of Fault in Our Stars and a few other books. He just published a new book about tuberculosis, and he was talking about audiobooks versus print books. It was a really interesting video where he talked about the experience of reading a book via an audiobook is an entirely different experience, and it engages a different part of your mind, because part of reading is that you're bringing yourself to the book and you're creating an uncommon experience just for the reader, between the reader and the author, or the reader and the text itself. At this point, the author is a little bit removed, and the way you do that through an audiobook is different than the way you do that through a print book. And so he was kind of lauding how important he thinks audiobooks are. I thought that was a great video. It didn't convince me to listen to more audiobooks just because I know that my mind gets distracted, and so they're not for me, but I think they are great. And I'm willing to dip my toe back into that world in the future. But for the most part, I go with print books, whether they be digital or physical. And that's it. The 9th prompt is to tag some people. I think all the people I usually tagged have been tagged already, so I'll take the coward's way out and say that if you are watching this video, then consider yourself tagged. Please feel free to share your answers to these prompts in your own video or even down below in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. For now, I'll say thank you for spending some time with me. So please be kind to yourselves, take care of each other, and go slowly.